Hi, Mom. So I got my ticket home from Europe. I get back on June 6th, but it's a really late flight because that was the cheapest, so it gets in at midnight. But don't worry, I'll get a shuttle from the airport so you don't have to pick me up. Like, really seriously, you don't have to. Okay, so love you. See you soon. Bye.
Hey guys, welcome to our Let's Play. Our group members are Allison, Nathalie, Zack, Alex, and Micaela, and we're playing Gone Home. In our analysis of Gone Home, we're focusing on the role the environment plays in the narrative. We want to examine the ways in which the environment tells a story and the kind of story it tells. After we'd each completed the game, we shared our experiences and realized the game's narrative unfolds both through free-form exploration, influenced by guidance, and restricted movement through the game space. This unfolding game narrative is unique in its portrayal of endogenous space and its use of environment and soundscape. Gone Home's immersive creative space and interactive story become an adventure for the player. In short, the environment generates a player-driven narrative through exploration, direction, mood, and sound. A storytelling combination made possible by the video game that takes advantage of its medium. Hey guys, I'm reading Nathalie's part. In Gone Home, exploration and investigation are encouraged as you enter a domestic space filled with doors, drawers, and miscellaneous objects. The player is driven to analyze these objects for some sort of meaning, to connect this lived-in space with the family that occupies it. As Polanski puts in her article, The Poetry of Created Space, this type of exploration becomes a sort of archaeological discovery. She writes that there's an emotional power in finding the scrawlings and journal entries and garbage of the people who used to be here and the relationship they had with their environment. What I felt playing Gone Home is the game is really all about the story, and the story is all about the environment. You complete the game by learning the story, and you learn the story by exploring the environment. The game is thus made of a narrative environment, or navigatable narrative, where, quote, players discover, uncover, and reveal the plot elements as they progress through the game. And while the main story is told through Samantha's journals, it is invariably intertwined with the objects in the environment. Those objects also speak for themselves in some sense. Consider the numerous Bibles scattered throughout the house. Although it's never made explicit through the journal entries, the Bible suggests that the Greenbriers are a religious household. Again, Polanski's analysis is relevant. Just as a poem can be delivered in multiple different voices, quote, a game space can tell as much about the story as the overarching plot, end quote. For instance, the Greenbriers' religious views might have something to do with their denial of same-sexuality and their insistence that it's just a phase. This detail and others like it, whether noticed or unnoticed by the player, changes their experience of the game. As critic Carmen Maria Machado explains, in Gone Home, missing certain texts or clues will not lead you to a different end, but can affect your understanding of the depth of the stories, end quote. In fact, after discussing our respective playthroughs, we realized there were many journal entries and bits of information we had each missed. When Allison played, she found a button which opened a secret passage that none of the rest of us had found. Thus, while the player can technically beat the game in under a minute using the Unlock Doors modification, the space can arguably be explored for hours as the player meticulously examines each piece of information to further their understanding of the space, the narrative, and the game as a whole. That being said, there are elements of the environment which guide the player down a certain narrative path.
Hi guys, this is Zack. I'm going to be talking about the division of the non-linear narrative into paths that allow for coherent progression. This is done through locks, keys, and codes that are found throughout the game. Throughout the game, players are given an allure of freedom to explore the house in any way they want. And the story is progressed at more or less the right order by the means of journal entries. The game, while appearing to be free is actually linear in the way it entices you to explore the world. There are 5 stages in this game that piece the narrative together. The first stage is when the player tries to enter the house and is given exposition on the story, looks around, finds the key, and gets into the house. Next is the first exploration phase, where the player enters the house and is immediately confronted with many choices in which direction they could choose to go. However, the upstairs does not look inviting and the door to the right is locked. So most players decide to go to the left, at least to start. The next phase is the goal-oriented exploration phase, where different locks have been found throughout the house and the player starts looking for an idea of what's behind them, and at the same time has a bit of backstory about the house, Sam, and the different plot lines that are going on. The fourth stage is the pre-climactic phase, where the player has a very open area in the house of which they have explored already and somewhat know how they believe the story will end. And they have access to the diary entries that have been in basements, secret passages, and all sorts of different hidden places throughout the house. The conclusion is the fifth and last phase, and this is where the stairs in the lobby are presented as a big step forward that is now ready to be taken by the player, who has pretty good blueprints of the house and is ready to head to the dark room where they have just received the last key. Here, the player, often not knowing exactly what they're going to find in the attic, succeeds in completing the game one way or another. Now, this may have the allure of a very open and convincing world, but upon further review, if you think about it, not many people lock doors or entire wings of their own house. So this idea creates what the player could use as a right order to progress through the game, and in turn develop her, being Sam's, relationship through the progress in the story.
Hey guys, I'm Allison. I'm going to be talking about the importance of acoustic space in situating a sonic experience. As a first-person exploratory adventure game with a very well-curated music selection and compositional soundscape, the game has many different tropes by which it develops its narrative. Aided by auditory details, diegetic and non-diegetic sounds, it keeps the player intrigued and also creates a tension within the atmosphere of the game experience. In Time and Space in Digital Game Storytelling, the authors speak of the importance of acoustic space. They say that auditory factors play an equally important role in the construction of game space, and that the dynamic design of musical soundtracks effectively creates both narrative and gameplay tension. There's a large underlying theme of horror within the narrative that slowly reveals itself to the player as they navigate many locked doors and pathways of the game. Slowly, the story unveils the figurative skeletons of Sam's family's past. A large part of understanding Gone Home hinges on utilizing sound as as a tool for navigation. Sound also plays a role in this game as a feedback system involving sonic cues, including the non-diegetic sounds of rain and thunder to the diegetic sounds of creaking floorboards, doors, household objects, and our own characters' footsteps. There's a responsive relationship between the player and the game that is mediated through sound. The importance of sound function can be expressed as the acoustic ecology, where we as the player become an essential element of changing space by responding to sound cues, creating new meaning to set surroundings. This means that all objects that produce sound are perceived as contributing factors to the game acoustic ecology. The developers of Gone Home worked closely with music composer Chris Remo and other bands like the Youngins and Heavens to Betsy, who play fictional bands in the game, producing an immaculate ambient soundtrack and soundscape emphasizing different feelings for the storyline, but also for the player to grasp the turmoil of emotions within the narrative of the game. From the sulky, nostalgic summer teenage feeling with slow and mellow tracks to cutting and aggressive tracks expressing a complicated, anguished feel, the role of music is an accent to the sense of place, both geographically and temporally, thus making this much part of the game setting as the unlocked doors of the game. The music the player will spend most of the time listening to is the ambient tracks composed by Remo, who created different tracks for each section of the game, including every audio journal entry made by Sam, creating an individual feel. From the ambient tracks to the painfully real audio recordings, the player feels a sense of unease as they explore the home. The amnesia-style beginning of the game commences the horror trope, and the horror allegory continues with the basement and attic acting as classic horror tropes, suggesting the discomfort of these places and questioning them. These elements also endow the home with the aspect of a living entity acting as a character of its own, therefore creating the horror trope, building uncertainty in the player, just like the characters of Gone Home, like Sam and Caitlin digging for secrets, finding hidden passages, and feeling discomfort within their own home and towards their parents. Yet the game reveals that Sam's curiosity also reveals parts of herself that are hidden, giving the game a multi-layered narrative. The creation of the soundtrack along with the acoustic ecology creates a musical backbone to the teenage angst we are meant to feel, consequently making the player share the activity with the composer of listening to understand and make sense of the sound environment and the importance of sound awareness within the atmosphere.
Hi guys, this is Micaela and I'm talking about mood and gendered space. The space within Gone Home functions as what Fullerton, Morey, and Pierce call for in game design as androgynous space in their article, A Game of One's Own Towards a New Gendered Poetics of Digital Space. They explain it as a space into which women and girls are invited and welcomed, but in which men and boys can also enjoy more diverse and nuanced form of play than are typically available to them. End quote. It's important to be careful in how we talk about gendered space because it's easy to fall into language that holds up problematic gender roles and erases gender fluidity from the conversation completely. Still, Gone Home manages to blend elements of the horror genre with mystery and exploratory play that makes the game appealing to a wide variety of demographics. Typical masculine qualities that are often associated with mainstream games like dominating space and conquering realms is removed from Gone Home. The focus is instead on family life, personal histories, and lesbian identities. It doesn't alienate any players by gendering the space, but is about exploring and uncovering secrets by interacting with the environment. It has the capacity to be intriguing and moving for any player, regardless of the typical interests of one's assigned gender. There's this ominous and unsettling feeling about that the game conveys really effectively from the first note on the front door where Sam asks Katie not to look for her. Katie has technically gone home, but this house isn't her home. She's exploring this unfamiliar house as she tries to make sense of what's happened since she's been away. One article I read by Robert Palmer about feminism in Gone Home had this to say of the game. Violence is often tied explicitly to masculinity and power. So when I think of feminism in the context of video games, I often think of something that is set in opposition to this dominant dynamic. And that's Gone Home. Which is not to say that Gone Home isn't tense, scary, or engaging. It's all of these things. What's more, it's very clever in how it is these things. End quote. From the beginning, the game is very effectively conveys the sense that something is not right. Exploring the creepy, empty, and possibly haunted house while uncovering these backstories of all of these characters make for a really rich playing experience. Gone Home offers a lot of players of any gender, offers a lot to any players because of how it tells stories and immerses the player in the mystery.
Hi everyone, this is Alex, and I'll be talking about the medium of video games and how it lends itself to the narrative of Gone Home. Video games as a storytelling medium is a vast and strongly debated topic, so I'll try and keep my discussion related directly to this game in particular. More specifically on how some of the alleged strengths and weaknesses of games in a medium make an appearance in this game. There's an article by Bernardo Malfitano which makes the argument that, as the title implies, video games are not the future of storytelling. Now bear in mind this article was written in 2003 and some of the examples of the limitations of video games may be a little dated. However, one concept in particular, being that of synchronic versus diachronic stories, has aged quite well. The synchronic story is described as being player-driven or purely kinematic. On the other hand, the diachronic story is a progression of overall narrative of the game and is immutable. This often renders the player a so-called passive participant in the diachronic story. Their actions have no effect overall, even if the playable characters are themselves central to the story. Again, this can be largely debated, especially with regards to modern games, but this concept is interesting to apply directly to Gone Home. Gone Home is an exploration game. The main mechanic of the game is often considered a secondary mechanic in others, exploring an environment, learning background information, and so on. Thus, in most games, exploration is meant to be somewhat passive and not needed in the progression along the diachronic storyline. In terms of telling a story, these lulls in the narrative, when the player engages in passive exploration, may be seen as a weakness in terms of setting a pace for a story. However, in Gone Home, Caitlin is meant to be a passive participant. All stories have already occurred, and Caitlin can have no effect on any of them. This, coupled with the inherent immersiveness of a game, leads the player to experience the story as Katie does, by learning it piece by piece, not necessarily in the right order, and not necessarily in its entirety. Thus, Gone Home, in fact, embraces the passive participant as a storytelling mechanism. You are meant to simply explore this unchangeable story yourself. This last point leads us to another potential weakness of games, relinquishment of narrative control to the player. An interesting read on this topic is entitled The Interactive Theater of Video Games, The Gamer as Playwright, Director, and Actor by Daniel and Sydney Hamann. Game writers must be aware that they can't control entirely the story if the player is to be allowed freedom of exploration. Zack has already covered how the separation of the house in Gone Home is meant to guide the player through a quasi-linear storyline. Despite this, the player can still recover separate stories in the quote-unquote wrong order. Whether this is a true weakness of the game, or as mentioned, a more realistic way to uncover a story, is also debatable. However, having experienced the game a few times myself now, I personally believe that jumping too far ahead in the house and diaries renders them somewhat confusing and perhaps causes them to lose some of their impact to the player. Now, it's difficult to speak of video games as a storytelling medium without mentioning the technological limitations which exist. Every medium has its weaknesses. The amount of pages left in a book or minutes left in a movie may give you some indication as to what may or may not happen in the story. I believe the same can be said of video games, especially considering their technological limitations and knowledge of the sheer amount of work that goes into every detail. This isn't to belittle the effort that goes into writing a story, but if you compare the act of writing about a new room in a home versus having to create every last visual detail of that room, you quickly realize the amount of man-hours that go into adding even the smallest detail of a game. The best example I have to make this point is the very conspicuous lack of mirrors in this game. This, coupled with the fact that every photo of a person in the game is painted or hand-drawn, as opposed to a 3D rendering, to me indicated that we would never encounter another human character, or ghost for that matter. In other words, no work had gone into creating any 3D model of a human character. This assumption led me to doubt that the hinted at possibilities of a ghost, or that a burglar was in the home, or that Sam may actually still be in the attic. Of course, I could very well have been wrong, but being aware of the fact that I was playing a video game altered my expectations and ultimately my experience with the story. So in conclusion, we'd like to say that Gone Home is a game that the player really benefits from thorough interaction with the space. The game is a good example of the possibilities of games as a medium, where constructs of gendered space are broken down, and the game is welcome to anyone. There's a really rich experience for the player created in how the game makes use of the space to tell its story, as well as its use of sound and play with conventions of horror. So with that, we'd like to thank everyone for watching our video, and we'd just like to leave you with a small Easter egg that we found when playing the game. So I'll leave you with that. Thanks again.
Meow meow. Meow meow. Meow. Meow 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 meow. Meow meow meow. Meow meow meow. Meow 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 meow. Meow meow. Meow meow meow. Meow 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 meow. Meow meow meow. Meow meow. Meow meow meow. Meow 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 meow. Meow 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 meow. Meow 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 meow.